So, this is our weekly class in Ethics of the Fathers, and we're still in the same Mishnah for the last few weeks. And today maybe we'll conclude it. We're talking about the bad traits that a person should avoid. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the great teacher of the post-temple destruction era, who lived through the destruction and preserved Judaism, asked his students, what is the right way to which a person should cleave? And his 5 students gave 5 different virtues: a good eye, a good friend, a good neighbor, a foresight, a good heart. Then he asked them, could you tell me, go out and observe which is the evil way a person should shun? And Rabbi Eliezer said an evil eye, which we discussed in previous classes. Rabbi Yeshua said an evil friend, and that we discussed last week. And then Rabbi Yossi says an evil neighbor. So we'll focus a little bit on an evil neighbor, a bad neighbor, evil neighbor. Of course, it can be taken literally that if you live next door to a very immoral person, that it's a bad influence. But a neighbor in this context doesn't necessarily mean someone who lives next door to you. It means someone with whom you have a casual relationship, as opposed to a friend, someone who you have a very close relationship. And sometimes you have people that are your neighbors in one form or another that are bad influences, and in a way worse than having a bad friend, an evil friend. Because when you're close to someone, you know their faults, you know what you have to avoid learning from, you know how to set up a protective barrier between you and the bad influence. You could have a person that you, let's say, work with, you work in the same place, so you have a very close relationship, but that person is has some very negative traits. Let's say they're an alcoholic, and you know that that's their vice, and you know that keep away from them when it comes to drinking. Don't go to the bar with them.
Unless they're paying.
Unless they're what? Paying for it. So you're not in that much danger, even though they're not a good influence, but you know how to protect yourself. You know how to resist being influenced. But when the person with whom you have a very casual relationship, not a real close person with whom you work all the time, but someone who has some very superficial relationship with you, but as a bad influence, you don't have the resistance because you didn't set yourself up to being influenced by that person. So you're not protecting yourself. You don't have a shield. And we are very much vulnerable whenever we are in an environment where people are not the right type of people. That's why Maimonides, Rabban, was very strong on keeping away from people who are a bad influence. Maimonides says that human beings are social creatures. That's part of who we are, and we're almost always influenced by the people with whom we have some type of relationship. So the influence of someone who is not close is what they call in English insidious. It's a covered up. It's not an overt kind of influence. Maimonides counseled the people who lived in Spain, who were forced into converting to Islam publicly, and privately they were able to maintain their Judaism. And there's a whole story. They were condemned by a rabbi. We spoke about this many times. And Maimonides defends them. But even after he defends these people, that their mitzvahs that they do privately in secrecy has value. You shouldn't denigrate them for that. At the end, he then turns around and says, but if you stay in this country, you are sinners. Because you cannot live in a place where you have bad influences, especially if the influences already had an impact that they were forced into publicly converting. Last week when we discussed a bad friend, we spoke about how the media could be a bad friend. But I'm going to say the same thing about a bad neighbor, because there are two kinds of influences from media. There's the influence that is direct. You watch a movie, and it's a negative movie, so it's a direct influence. It's not insidious. It's just it's in your face. But then there's the kind of media that we don't look for. It's just an indirect influence. People, even if they didn't watch the movie, even if they didn't listen to the broadcast, somehow word gets around, and certain values you pick up by osmosis, just by living in that environment. All of a sudden, people start talking differently. People start using different language, different concepts, different mindset. So when you pay to be influenced, then it's a direct influence, and it's not as hard to shield yourself from it. But when it's the influence that's in the air, in the environment, that's very hard to shield yourself from. Rabbeinu Zakkai, one of the early commentators, 13th century, he says that a bad neighbor is your body. Your soul coexists with your body. The soul wants to go in one direction, but your body, which is very close to your soul, because your soul inhabits the body, wants to go in a different direction. So he becomes a bad influence. So you can get the impression from Rabbeinu Zakkai that a person should try to do everything in their power to shun their body. Well, the Baal Shem Tov said no. The Hasidic philosophy espoused by the Baal Shem Tov said, no, absolutely not. That's not what it means when it said, he doesn't address about the bad neighbor, but if we're using this term bad neighbor, it says, yes, their body might be a bad neighbor, it might be a negative influence, but the solution is not to shun the body, it's to work with the body. And he used a novel interpretation of a biblical verse. The Torah speaks about a case where you see your fellow's donkey falling under its weight, and you might think, it's none of my business, why should I help him? So the Torah says, Azov ta'azov imo, you must help him. So the Baal Shem Tov gave a different translation of this whole verse. He says, if you see the donkey of your enemy, now the Hebrew word for donkey is chamor. Chamor also means your material existence, your body. If you look at your body and you reflect on it, and you come to the conclusion that it's your enemy, and you might think, I'm not going to work with it because it's my enemy, I have to shun it. And there was a philosophy, and there still are schools of thought that believe in punishing the body and going through deprivation. Fasting, there were people who would, in the winter time, this applies to Buffalo, as a way of penance, they would sit in the snow without any clothing to punish themselves. Self-mortification, it would be called. Yeah.
Isn't it true that the essence of free will is a choice between honoring the body or honoring the soul? So that if you honor the soul, then you can honor the body, because the body is actually earth, the soul is heaven, and if we want to ascend, bring heaven down to earth, we elevate the body through the mitzvah.
That's right, absolutely. That's what the Baal Shem Tov taught, that if you think your body is your enemy and you want to distance your body and punish it, as there are certain schools of thought that did believe that it's important for us to punish our bodies so that the soul is not in any way hampered in its quest. No, azov ta'azov imo, you have to help and work with it. You have to use the body as a vehicle for serving God, not punishing the body, but elevating the body. So, yes, the body could be a bad neighbor to the soul. That may be true, but this doesn't mean that you have to break it and you have to punish it. But we also have, together with our godly soul, we also have an animal soul. And part of the animal soul is the Yetzer Hara, the evil impulse. What causes a person to commit a crime? It's an evil impulse that every human being has, the potential for evil. And that evil comes from a force that is part of the animal soul. So I have to explain a little bit more what's the difference between the animal soul and the Yetzer Hara. Sometimes we use those two terms interchangeably, an animal soul and the evil impulse, the evil inclination, but they're not synonymous. The animal soul is the part of us that gives us life. And it's the part of us that, just like the animal, wants one thing. It wants to exist. It wants to thrive. It wants to take care of its needs. Like a little child, a little baby. What does a little baby want? The little baby wants just one thing. It wants to take care of it wants to be comfortable. It wants to be fed. It wants to be diapered. It wants to be pampered. So the same thing with an adult. Your animal soul just is self-centered. Now, being self-centered as a child is not a bad thing. That's natural. That's nature. But when you become an adult and you're totally self-centered, that becomes a vice. Your Yetzer Hara is the part of you that uses your self-centeredness to do things that are improper, immoral. So your animal soul just wants to live. It wants to thrive. It wants to be taken care of. It wants to enjoy life. But then, because it's self-centered, it generates a desire, a will to do things that are not kosher, that are not moral, because it wants to satisfy its own interests. So which of the two, so we have a godly soul in us and an animal soul, and the Yetzer Hara, which is an extension of our animal soul. Which is the bad neighbor? The bad neighbor is the Yetzer Hara, the evil impulse. That's the bad neighbor. That bad neighbor you have to control. Your animal soul you have to elevate. How do you get your animal soul to be elevated? Because your animal soul, unlike an animal, a literal animal, the animal soul is the animal soul of a human being, which is a sentient being, a being that has intellect. So if you tell your animal soul, look, you're not stupid. You may be an animal, but you're not dumb. You realize you want what's good for you. And what you think what's good for you are physical pleasures. But you know what? That's not really the best thing for you. I can show you something that's more pleasurable, more exciting than any physical pleasure. And that is the study of Torah, doing a mitzvah, helping another person. These are things that bring you much more joy and contentment and fulfillment than any material thing that you could crave. So the animal soul is not stupid. The animal soul says, well, let me try it. Try it and you like it, as they say. You didn't know it's a Talmudic phrase. Actually, it's a biblical phrase. We say that in our prayers. It's from the book of Psalms. Tamu uru'u kitov Hashem. Taste it, and you'll see that God is good. If a person really reflects on what God is all about and what godly things are all about, you'll realize it's the most delicious thing that can be. It's the most pleasurable and the most exciting experience that you can have, much more than anything material. So you can get the animal soul to not be punished, taking away everything from it, but realizing there's something more pleasurable than what it is used to, that it's accustomed to. So the body could be a bad neighbor if you just let the body allow itself to go free in its indulgences, but it also could be your partner and could become your good neighbor. Now, I mentioned in an earlier class that the 5 teachings of these 5 rabbis correspond to the 5 things that we do in the holiday of Sukkot, the 4 species and the Sukkah. And I mentioned that the good neighbor, we've spoken about the good neighbor, is the willow. The willow grows in clusters. They're all neighbors to each other. But one of the things that makes a willow not kosher, there are 2 kinds of willows, basically. There's the willow that the edges are smooth, and there's the willow that has jagged edges, large jagged edges. They're not kosher for the mitzvah. You can't use them. But what does that mean in terms of a neighbor? That when you want to be a neighbor to someone, a bad neighbor is a neighbor that you have a relationship that are jagged edges, that you not smooth edges. That's not a good neighbor. That's a negative trait, which translates in, also we said that the willow corresponds to the power of speech. It looks like lips. What's a bad neighbor? When you have bad communication skills, when you can't relate to your neighbor. And when I say neighbor again, it doesn't just mean the person who lives next door. It can mean people with whom you have a casual relationship. Obviously, if it's a close friend, you have good communication if it's a close friend. But if it's not a close friend, you may not have the right communication skills. Then Rabbi Shimon says that a negative trait is one who borrows and does not repay. For he that borrows from man is as one who borrows from God. Blessed be he. So what does this mean? Simply it means a person who borrows and doesn't anticipate the future, that they're not going to be able to repay it. Well, if you borrow knowing that you're not going to repay it, you shouldn't be borrowing.
Just briefly, I just had this idea that really this is a much deeper teaching, because one who borrows and does not repay is also one who does not perform the mitzvot. The mitzvot are the ways that we repay God. So when we borrow and don't do mitzvot, we're not repaying God. We're in debt.
Okay, I don't have to give the class now. No, you don't have to apologize. You make my life easier. You're 100% right. That's a good point. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. I like to start off with a simple meaning, and then we get to the deeper meaning. So the simple meaning is you borrow money knowing that you're not going to be able to repay it. So don't call it borrowing. Ask for a handout. If you need it, the person should be honest and say to the person, the benefactor, I'm short of cash. I need something for my house. Now, if you're the benefactor, it says you should tell people that you're giving them as a loan to preserve their dignity. But you don't really mean it as a loan. You're really giving it as a handout. But people will be embarrassed. So here's a little bit of it depends on which side you're on. If you're on the side of the recipient, you shouldn't ask for a loan if you don't plan on repaying it. But if you're on the giving side, you should give it as a loan, knowing that the person is not going to repay it, and I don't care for you to repay it. I'm just saying it's a loan, so you shouldn't be embarrassed. So that's the simple meaning, that you borrow and you don't, that means that's a person who doesn't look into the future. Because when Rabbi Shimon was asked, what's a good trait? What did he say? Someone who sees the future. So the bad trait, the reverse of that, is someone who borrows and has no intention or no ability to repay it. That's one way the commentaries explain. Another way, that if you borrow money and you don't repay it, what are the odds that you're going to be able to borrow in the future? No one's going to want to lend you anymore, because you didn't, when you borrowed the first time, you didn't realize that it's not good for you. You may be well off now because you got money for nothing, but it's not going to be good in the future, because when you really need a loan and you will be able to repay it, you won't get it. So that's another way of looking at a person who doesn't look into the future. But that's just common sense. There must be a deeper understanding of this as well. So as you just said, we are all borrowers. Number one, everything that we have, we're borrowing from God. We don't own anything, really, because God could take it away anytime He wants. So He gives us gifts, He gives us talents, He gives us resources, and there's a quid pro quo. God wants us to use our talents and our resources to do a mitzvah. So if we do the mitzvah, we're repaying our debt. A person who's just on the borrowing end, who just says, I want to take what God gives me, I'm very happy to receive all these gifts from God, but I don't plan on repaying it, that's a bad trait that a person should avoid. On Simchas Torah, we dance with the Torah in circles. What does that have to do with what we're discussing? Because those circles, the Hebrew word for them is what is the Hebrew word for that exercise of dancing in circles? Hakafot, or Hakafos, however you pronounce it. That word, that word means circles. Go in a circle, but it also means credit. Because credit is a circle. You're borrowing money, but then you're returning it. So one of the Hasidic masters once explained that on Simchas Torah, God gives us blessing for the whole year. That's why it's such a joyous time, because this is when you receive the greatest of blessings that God gives us. But it's on credit. God expects us to repay Him during the year. He's willing to share with us and give us all these gifts. But so a person who's a bad person, the evil path, it's someone who borrows, who dances on Simchas Torah, and gets all the greatest gifts, but doesn't pay back.
Does that apply not just for money, but if someone does a service for you and you are supposed to pay and you don't, that's the same kind of thing?
You owe the money. You bought.
But I mean, you didn't borrow money. The person did something for you and you were supposed to pay them.
Yeah, the same thing. Yeah, yeah. It's not just money. It's about everything in life.
Yeah, why are you supposed to settle up before Rosh Hashanah?
It's a good idea. It says when Abraham came to Canaan, there was a famine in the land, and he went down to Egypt. And then the Torah says on the way back, what did he do on the way back? So Rashi explains, he paid his debts. So simply it means he didn't have any money, so he had to borrow money on the way to Egypt. He wasn't wealthy yet. And on the way back, when he got wealth, he paid his debts. That's a simple meaning. But the deeper meaning is that Abraham was demonstrating to the world. Abraham was the first teacher of morality to the world. Before him, there were moral people, righteous people, a handful of them, but they didn't spread it to the rest of the world. Abraham was the first teacher of morality and ethics to the world. And what was his lesson? He says, pay back your debts. Look at how much God gives us. And it's not only God, but God gives us through other people as well. You are indebted to them, and pay your debts. We're living in a society where we focus on what everyone owes us. What's the often hear, and I often hear this when they hear an advertisement on the radio. They'll advertise a certain product, a certain service, and he says, you deserve it. We deserve everything. No, why don't they talk about you owe it to someone? Our society is based on a faulty premise. We are obsessed with rights, protecting our rights, and we have the Bill of Rights, but not our obligations. If people would focus on their obligations rather than their rights would be protected. Because if my obligation is to you, so if I fulfill my obligation to you, your rights are protected. But if I'm only focused on my rights, then I don't care about you, I care about my rights. And you care about your rights, and when they conflict, what do we have? We have conflict. We have fights. And usually who wins? There's an expression, might makes right. whoever is stronger or whoever can afford more lawyers will win in any type of dispute. Because when you're fighting about rights, you're really fighting for your selfish interest, and you're entitled to. We do have rights, obviously, but the right should be born out of other people's obligation. And our obligation should create rights, take care of the rights of others. So that's what he's saying. If you're just focused, you're obsessed with your rights. Look, we're living in a country where that's the language, but we have to realize that yes, I can fight for my rights, but I should put the focus mostly on my obligations. There's another interpretation of not paying our debts. We are the beneficiaries of earlier generations. What we have is given to us by our parents, our grandparents, our teachers, our forebears, our ancestors. And sometimes we think to ourselves, yes, we're on the receiving end, but we don't think we have to plan for the future. There's a story in the Talmud. The original Rip Van Winkle was a righteous man called Choni Hamagel. Choni, the circle drawer. He was the one who, in a time of drought, drew a circle around himself, and he says to God, God, I'm not leaving this circle until the rain comes down. I could do that also, but the rain won't come down. That's the only little difference between me and Choni. But this Choni went... This Choni took a nap, and he woke up 70 years later. But before he took the nap, he saw someone planting a carob tree. Not carrots, carob. A carob tree. And he asked him, when will you see the fruit? He says, well, in 70 years. He says, 70 years? He says, my ancestors planted the carob tree, now I have the fruit, so I'm planting for the next few generations. And he went to sleep, and he woke up, and he saw someone picking up carobs, and he says, oh, it grew so fast. He says, no, I'm a grandson or a great-grandson of the person who planted them. That's the story of Choni Hamagel. So some people will say, I have carobs, why should I plant? But then you're not paying your debts. What we get from our ancestors, we have to show gratitude and plan for the future. And what does he say? He says, someone who borrows, who doesn't repay, it's like borrowing from God. Because God is the guarantor. And if you don't pay, the guarantor who guarantees your well-being, then you're stealing from God, not just stealing from a person. So I want to share a story, a famous story of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, famous Hasidic master. There was a man in town, Berditchev, who was known as the biggest miser in town, and no one liked him. Very cheap. No one would ever get a penny out of him. And when he died, no one was planning to go to the funeral. He would just be buried by the burial society, and there would be no one there. He didn't have any family, and no one cared. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak made a point of going to the funeral. And when the rabbi went, and the whole crowd followed him. And then people asked him, why did you go to this guy? This guy was a horrible person. He never shared anything with anyone. He says, I'll tell you why. As the rabbi, I'm the judge. I had 3 court cases where I had to adjudicate, and he won all the cases. And what were these cases? Well, one case was a man who had traveled to earn money, comes to town, and his money disappeared. And he was became very ill. And this miser, claimed that he found the money, and he gave it to him. And when the man later on found the money that he had lost, he realized that this man gave his own money when he obviously wasn't the one who found it. So he says, I have to repay you. And the so-called miser said, no, you don't have to repay me. And they went to the rabbi as a court case. You don't have that in America where you come to court, says, I owe you money. And the other guy says, no, you don't owe me any money. Let's go to court. Let's take it to the Supreme Court. So he came to me for adjudication, and I ruled in favor of the miser that he doesn't have to take the money. That was one case. The second case was a man who was very poor decided that he has to look for a way of earning a living in another city. So he traveled. So his wife tells him, what am I going to live on that you're going to go away? Like, Lisa, when you're here, you made a few cents. You're going to go away. I'll be destitute. I won't have anything. So he said, so the husband said, the miser, I'm working for him, and he's going to pay you. Which was made up. It was above a mice. It was a fairy tale. So, sure enough, Friday comes, and she goes to the miser, and she says, where's my money? Where's my allowance? And the people in the office over there said, what are you talking about? And she made a big ruckus, so the miser comes out of his own office, and the woman says, my husband told me that he's working for you, and you promised to support me when he's gone. And the man says, that's right, that's true. And he supported her. And then when the man came back and he made some money, he wanted to repay him and he refused. So they came to the court and I ruled in his favor that he doesn't have to take the money. And the third case was a man who came to the miser to borrow some money. And the miser says, I need a guarantor. So who's going to guarantee that you're going to repay me? He says, God will guarantee it. And what happened is the man was able to repay it eventually, and he comes to the miser and he says, here's the money that I owe you. He says, you don't owe me anything. He goes, what do you mean I don't owe you? I borrowed money from you. I owe you the money. He says, but you made God as the guarantor, and God already repaid me. So you don't owe me anything. And they took it to court, and again he won the case. That was the miser. So sometimes God is the guarantor, and when you don't pay, God is going to have to pay, and you owe God. What time is it? Okay,
There's only one Ba'al Bayit, right?
What?
There's only one Ba'al Bayit.
Right. Rabbi Lazar says an evil heart, a person who lets his desires control him. When the animal soul is so self-absorbed, it has no control. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is a person who doesn't care about anything, an insensitive person, a person who is driven by ego and cannot see the other person's needs. There's a statement in the book of Proverbs, the heart of a fool is on the left. Yeah, if you're a fool, your heart is on the left.
Isn't everybody's heart is on the left?
Oh, good question. How did you know I wanted to talk about that? Yeah, a fool's heart is on the left. What does that mean? Where does anyone else have their heart? It leans to the left. So I'll answer with a little story, little anecdote. Someone came to the Rabbi, and the Rebbe was trying to impress upon him the importance of the mitzvah to love your fellow as yourself. And the Rebbe asked him a question. He said, in Judaism, everything we do, we favor the right side, if you're right-handed. When you do a mitzvah, you give charity, you do it with your right hand. When you blow the shofar, you blow with the right side of your mouth. And any mitzvah you do, tefillin, you wrap with your right hand, you wrap. Unless you're left-handed, everything is reversed. That becomes your right hand.
And you wrap the left hand.
What?
You wrap with your right hand, but you actually...
You put it on the left, but the mitzvah you do, by the motion that you do with your right. Everything is right. So why is the heart on the left? So the Rebbe says, because you are facing the other person. And when you're facing the other person, your heart is on his right. that your heart should, so the fool has his heart always on the left. It's always for himself. He's never looking, he's never facing the other. That's the fool. The person who is smart and moral, his heart is always on the right, because he's always facing the other. He's always giving to the other. Now, he said that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, of all these negative traits, which is the opinion that I favor? He said, I favor the bad heart, the evil heart. For in his words, your words are included. Why is the evil heart worse than the evil eye? And by the same token, the good heart is better than the good eye. Because all the other traits don't require your feelings. You can have a good eye. You could see the good in people. You can be optimistic, but it doesn't affect your emotions. It's an attitude. It's a mindset. A heart is where your feelings are. That's when we say a good heart, we mean your feelings. If your virtues are just based on the mind, they're cerebral, they're on the mind, but they don't reach the heart, then it doesn't mean that you have changed your personality. Your personality is still not transformed. It's when it reaches the heart, when you really have those feelings of love, of compassion, of consideration for others in your feelings, not just in your mind, that leads to everything else that's good. A human being is an intellectual being, but if you remain with the intellect and it doesn't affect your emotions, you're not a complete human being. The Talmud says that the Torah compares a person to a tree. What is the comparison to a tree? A tree produces fruit. But the tree is the source of the fruit. But if a tree is planted and it doesn't produce fruit, even after 70 years, if it doesn't produce any fruit, it's a worthless tree. The Torah says you're not allowed to cut down a fruit tree. If a person has a fruit tree in their backyard they want to get rid of, it's a very, very serious matter. It says it's a very dangerous thing to do. You should consult with your local rabbi, whether you can do it, how to do it, if you can do it at all. But if it's not a fruit tree, you can chop it down, no big deal. Why? Because if a tree doesn't produce fruit, there's something defective about the tree. It says one of the curses, we'll have to stop in a minute, one of the curses that came about as a result of the forbidden fruit that was eaten by Adam and Eve was that trees would not bear fruit. Before the sin, all trees bore fruit. And when Mashiach comes, all trees will have fruit. But the trees that don't bear fruit, that's a curse. What does that mean in terms of human personality? If a person is a tree, a person has a brain and is smart and has talent, but it doesn't produce fruit, it doesn't manifest itself in a person's feelings, then that is a non-fruit-bearing tree. And it's not what a human being is all about. A human being is not just a mind. We have AI is going to soon be smarter than people, but it's still not going to be human because it doesn't have feelings. It can't have feelings. People who just look at a human being as a intellect, AI is going to replace them. But it can't replace feelings. And that's why the good heart it encompasses everything else, and the bad heart encompassing all the other negatives. And the good heart, all the positives. I like to end on the word positives rather than on the other word.
Are you positive?
Absolutely. Any questions?